Okay, let me share my screen so you can all see what I see. Oh. Okay, welcome everybody to our open hour this week. I'm excited that you all are here. And we were just chatting a little bit before getting started, and we have Jim, who is brand new and found us through the Docs Jam. And welcome, Jim. We're excited you're here. We have a lot of members of our community and core team, and we're excited to jump in. So we have a few particular topics we want to hit on today. So I hope everybody's ready to chat. So I am your host, Janae Andress. I am the SALT Community Manager, and it is not February 18th. It is February 25th, but I missed that slide. So I'm just going to ask for all your forgiveness and grace today on that typo, and let's move on. Okay, so today we have a few general updates. We, of course, have updates about our release cycle. Not a lot by way of package updates, kind of the same as last week. We will, of course, provide a link to our SEPs, our SALT enhancement proposals. And I would love to have a discussion around our working groups and clinics that have been kind of in flux lately. And as always, we will have plenty of time for Q&A and community discussion. And I also would just like to let you all know that my hand is not diseased. I let my neighbor do henna on my hand. So if you see weirdness, I talk with my hands, and you're gonna see that. I told her she could do a design on my wrist, and then she just kept going, and I'm like, well, that's okay. It looks really cool. She did a great job. I'll show you that.
That's typically how henna goes.
Right? Just do their thing. It's really, really interesting. It's a very cool practice. Okay, so general updates. So one thing I want to touch on is I feel like we've had a lot of questions around the naming conventions of SALT project and of SALT. So for those of you who don't know, like Jim, you're just finding us. So we are SALT, right, as an open source project. We're with SALT Stack. So SALT Stack, right, was the company that, originated SALT, right? And so SALT Stack has been acquired by VMware. So SALT Stack is just kind of gone. So you'll see SALT Stack still in the naming conventions of various things like our Twitch stream and GitLab and GitHub and Slack even. We're not going to change that immediately. We will change it this year. But honestly, we're just hesitant to break things. So bear with us while it still says SALT Stack for a minute. That's really just because we don't want to break links. That is the long and short of it. So, but SALT Stack is basically just going away. So SALT project is specifically in reference to the governance, right, of SALT, of the SALT open project. SALT project encompasses just all the things we do with SALT, and we do SALT Air, we do all these things underneath SALT project, but SALT is still how we refer specifically to the open source project. SALT is still the software. And I just really wanted to emphasize that because I know there have been a few questions in Slack and in conversations around the naming conventions. So I hope that helps clarify some things. Transitions, right, always bring up questions. Does anyone have questions around the naming conventions that I can address? Or is that fairly clear? I'm going to take that as a compliment to how well and clearly I explained that, because there are no questions. Perfect.
So in the doc, should we primarily refer to it as SALT or SALT projects? Like,
so,
I mean, how do we talk about?
No, that's a good question. So are you talking about, typically it would probably be SALT from what I'm assuming that you're frequently referencing in the docs. Unless someone can think of an instance where it would be something else, because SALT project is how I refer to like us as a team, us as a group, it's the governance, right? But SALT is still what you would refer to as, the software. So when you're saying, hey, you don't say installing SALT project, you'd say installing SALT.
And then I suppose you'd say things like SALT project provides repositories for SALT here.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, where one is, or I don't know, POP and item projects, would you technically consider them under SALT project? They're just not SALT itself because they're their own project.
That's right. Currently, yes. So they're a separate open source project, but they're governed underneath SALT projects.
Yeah, and that's been a thing I've been doing on the Twitch streams as well, is rather than saying, oh, this is the SALT stack or whatever, it's the SALT project.
Yeah. Awesome.
And just trying to work to use SALT project wherever I would normally use SALT stack in the past.
That's perfect. We updated the branding on Twitch. So now when you go on there, you see SALT project branding, but it is still SALT stack for the link. And again, that's just, we're avoiding breaking links, but we'll probably change that in the pretty soon future. We just kind of have to have everybody like ready to change all the links at once, because we just don't want anyone in the community to run into, oh, we clicked on this and now we can't get to it. We want to make sure we know exactly where all the links are and we update them right away. We don't want anyone to be in a rough situation of having anything broken.
Sounds like a job for a tech writer. Huh?
Right? There's always a job for a tech writer. Yeah. Why do I always switch sides? So we just don't want anyone to deal with anything being broken. So any other questions? Different examples of naming convention issues? Okay, if you ever run into anything or you have a question, let me know. If you need branding for SALT project for any reason, we do have a repo for that. Reach out to me if you need the link. But it is on GitHub, so, or is it on GitLab? I think it's on GitLab. It is on GitLab. Also, we have a new episode of SALT Air dropping today. So it'll be up this afternoon. It's not up yet, but we have a new SALT Air episode every Thursday afternoon. And so we have a new one. And I believe in this one, Tom will be talking about what he means when he says, when in doubt, shell out. So that's a fun one. That will be up later this afternoon. And for those of you who don't know, SALT Air is our video series that gives us insight into kind of behind the scenes of SALT project and additional education on all things SALT. So awesome, we're excited about that. And then moving on with updates, we have our next monthly virtual meetup on March 17th. So we do our virtual meetups every third Wednesday at 5 o'clock Mountain Time. We were originally based out of Utah, and so we do everything in Mountain Time, and that usually works. So, and so yeah, every third Wednesday, 5 o'clock Mountain, March 17th, Randy Thompson is going to be talking to us. We love Randy. He is with GoDaddy, and he's a huge part of our community, very involved. And he's going to be talking about some really cool stuff and doing some cool demos for us. So we are excited about that. So I hope you guys can join us. A few updates on the release. We will be releasing a CVE today at about noon, so after open hour. And so the release isn't until noon. So if you have questions about that, hit us up on Slack. I'm sure there will be chatter about that this afternoon and in the coming days. So we're happy to engage with you there on that once that release occurs later today. And then we have the aluminum release Still scheduled for March 31st. And just a reminder that we are basically doing a code freeze as of today, looking at that timeline. The official code freeze, right, is starting March 4th, but we aren't receiving things as of today. So any questions on that timeline? It's the same as last week with the timeline, so no change there. Okay. And we have a link here for the project board. If you want to get involved in the package updates conversation, there is a Slack channel for it. I know last week when we shared this, we had several of you join, and that was really great. So if you haven't yet, feel free to join and be in those conversations. Leave that up for a second. If there's any comments or questions on that. Okay, and SEPs, we don't really have a lot to say about that this week. Like I said last week, we were able to move a lot of them forward, and a lot of them are in their final stages or resolved at this point, which is really great. And as always, if you have a proposal for how we can enhance SALT, we want to hear your SALT enhancement proposal. So you can submit it on GitHub, and we will review that and do what we can with it. We love hearing from the community and how we can do things differently. Okay, so I'd like to spend some time here. We have our working groups and clinics. So every week, right, we have our various working groups. We post our what's happening across different channels. Your source of truth is still saltproject.io. So if you haven't bookmarked that, please do. Saltproject.io. We are in the middle of installing a new calendar plugin that we are very, very excited about. So I'm hoping that next week at Open Hour, I'll be able to show you guys how cool it is and how functional and how we have just no issues with it. And it's the newest, greatest thing with our calendar. But we're very excited to have that in place so that everyone can access our events and our working groups and clinics just that much easier. So we're, like I said, very much looking forward to that. And which actually reminds me, Jim, I wanted to ask you and put you on the spot. How did you find out about the Docs Jam? If the Docs Jam was how you found out about SALT?
Write the doc Slack. And,
Oh yeah?
Yeah, Elisa posted the message to it. So
okay, I love it. Yeah, we're always
okay.
curious.
So write the docs is just the bomb. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, I'd like to hear how people are hearing about our events. So, and we'll be sharing more about our events in different avenues. We do have a subreddit where we'll be sharing, like our Docs Jam we shared on subreddit and things like that. So, or on our Salt Stack subreddit, which is another example of a naming convention that hasn't switched over. So, okay, so our working groups that we have Cloud, Formulas, Docs, Mac OS, and Windows right now, and we're forming a security working group and talking about some other ones as well. We do have our test clinics every other, like Tuesdays and every other Thursday. Our Docs clinic, it's every other Thursday. And so
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm starting my stream for Cloud.
Oh yes, and I should have put that in. Thanks, Tyler. So when did you say it was? That's why it's not in. I didn't know that. Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Monday, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard.
Can you say that again? It was a little choppy.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Mountain Standard Time.
1 p.m. Excellent. That'll be awesome. So I will add that to our community calendar. So Tyler will be doing his Twitch stream every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1 p.m. That'll be great. And okay, so working groups. I hope you guys will be chatty about this with me. We have our Cloud working group is paused currently. There have been conversations around leaning into Kubernetes focus with the cloud working group, and other discussions on just starting a new group on Salt and Kubernetes. So I know everyone has a lot of different thoughts on it. And I think the best approach with this is to just say, we're going to make a decision, by a certain time, and we'll make a decision, right? Because I don't think we'll all necessarily all get on the same page, but I think we'll get close. So let's talk about that. Let's also talk about, I'd like to hear if anybody from the other groups are here, things that are going well, things that we could work on. Let's put some visibility on the working groups. I think formulas is kind of trucking along. I haven't heard otherwise unless someone wants to raise a hand. Docs is doing its thing. I think Windows needs a little revival. So talk to me, who's in the working groups? Let's have a chat. And I know we're going to lean into the cloud Kubernetes conversation pretty heavy. But before we do that, are there any thoughts on the other groups that anyone would like to vocalize? What needs help? What's going well? Let's chat. Everything going perfectly? I think everyone's just like, we want to talk about cloud and Kubernetes. All right, fine. Release the hounds. Talk to me about it.
Janae, can I make one quick comment about
Yes.
just the working groups in general before we jump into
Please.
Kubernetes?
Yes, Gareth, please.
So it's like, just based on my observations of a lot of them, Windows had this experience, Mac OS as well. And the formulas is a perfect example of this too, is the working groups are really successful when they have a project.
Yes.
So like something that they're trying to accomplish. Like a good example, like Mac OS, they wanted to make sure that certain versions of Salt was running on them. Windows, the working group had a similar goal. So it seems like the working groups that we have that aren't being successful, that could be a way to kind of re-energize them and kind of see like, okay, what do the people in those groups want to accomplish? What is the goal? What do they want Salt to do on Windows, on Mac OS, or cloud, for example? So just some thoughts.
I think that's a really great thought, and something I was thinking about today is, when there is something to be done, there's a lot more reason to be active. I think it's harder for people to, volunteer their time and spend their time on something when they're not seeing a clear vision and a defined agenda, if you will, within the group. And that's sort of how they tend to taper out, is when there's not something that they see that they're needed on. People don't like to go where they're not needed. So there's not a clearly defined need or use, then it tends to taper out. So, and that's fine. We don't want to keep people in a working group just for the sake of keeping the group going. We want the group to have a purpose. So I wouldn't hesitate to pause a group for a month if there's not an active thing to do. But if there is, let's make sure that's clearly defined and rolling. Okay, what are some other thoughts?
I think that's what was actually good for the Docs Jam, for example, is that it was successful in the sense that it had a really clear outline of what the goals were. And I think that the working group, we're brainstorming on kind of what should be the next steps. And I'm trying to figure out too kind of what would be the best. It's hard because Docs, we've talked about this before. What the other working groups can maybe have a narrow window of, this is maybe a specialization we're looking at, but documentation touches everything. And so it could be hitting, hey, in order to even update this doc, particular skill sets are even needed to understand the underlying technology and maybe the target API that Salt is managing, et cetera, depending on what kind of issues or things you're looking at. So it's been interesting navigating that from the doc side. And I think Docs, we're probably going to focus more on, I probably want to focus more on user experience, navigating the websites, search, that kind of thing, because then it's not looking at specific issues that are around this little thing could be tweaked about it. And otherwise, I'm kind of just doing docs clinics. Like today's a docs clinic later today at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, where I'm just going over tasks I'm working on, unless people are on the Twitch stream also asking about particular things they're looking at in docs.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Nick, I think you had unmuted earlier. I don't want to cut you off. You had some thoughts on Cloud Group. I believe you're the working group captain currently for Cloud.
I mean, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts, right? I was just going to sort of recap where we were to date, right? So we went on pause, partly because people weren't showing up, and partly because I couldn't run the one in February. So we put it on pause at least for that long. And always happy to resume that whenever it is that there's sufficient interest in order to drive some of the projects that are out there, right? Like it's kind of the inverse of what Gareth was talking about. You know, in this case, we don't have interest in order to move forward with any projects. It's not like there isn't projects to work on. And I think a couple of open hours ago, I forget who it was, it might have been Barry or somebody, had brought up, hey, since Cloud's going on pause, you could roll Kubernetes up underneath of it. I'm fine either way, really. I don't care whether or not we use the Cloud Working Group infrastructure and just start talking about Kubernetes stuff since they're not doing anything, or if there's a dedicated group. It fundamentally doesn't matter to me. I think that they're both good causes. It's just we need some heat around them in order to start talking about them.
Yeah, yesterday we talked a little after hours about how the Cloud Working Group in some ways kind of became the item working group, because that's where we have the most experience there. And so we could I'm going to try and move some of the salt modules for Kubernetes into its own project. And then that could be orchestrated under the Cloud group and then pass it over to a Kubernetes group was kind of the idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, I talked to you on Slack about this last night, real briefly. You need to be really aware of what your intent is with the Kubernetes tooling, because you're jumping into a crowded ecosystem. There's a ton of tools. Kubernetes is a developer framework. They love it. And since developers are working inside of it, there's just been this explosion of applications that do stuff. So like, what do you want it to do? How is it going to do things, right? Like, Kubernetes YAML by itself is YAML. So, how are you going to structure YAML objects inside of YAML objects and things like that? Like, what's your intent with the framework? So, I mean, that's all stuff that we can talk about, but, you can do with whatever your time you'd like. I would just be hesitant to run out there and start porting stuff over without a clear vision of what you want to do.
So I'll reiterate what I said to the aforementioned internal after hours discussion that Tyler alluded to there. I wonder if a better approach might be, I'm not saying like we don't move the Kubernetes states and modules to item and to pop. That for most of Salt is inevitable, and as well as like breaking out into separate projects to make it easier to manage. But I wonder if a first kind of pass at a Kubernetes working group might be to not focus on the how, but focus on the why. Like go to the community, everyone here as well as the community at large, and say, okay, we're thinking about shoring up Kubernetes support in Salt. What does that mean to you? What do you want to do with Kubernetes and Salt? What does that look like? And then once we have a clearer picture, then we can start to kind of figure out, okay, what does that larger picture look like? What do we need to do to get to that goal? Because as you said, like if we don't have a plan, Kubernetes is huge, and there are 1.5 million ways to do things in Kubernetes, as well as 1.5 million different tool sets to do those things. And so unless we have a clear plan, we're going to be just like noise in the ether.
Absolutely.
I think we lost Janae, who I think is going to be trying to rejoin here.
Looks like you're in charge, Derek.
Well, I was going to say that, yeah, from the Kubernetes, I've actually been thinking that same thing, that I wasn't sure what piece, I mean, other than the fact that then there'd be integrations into Salt, that now Salt can be used to maybe gather information, I don't know, as part of it too, because yeah, there's YAML. So then what are you going to have? Are you going to have nested YAML and Jinja states that are actively hitting the Kubernetes API? Yeah, I don't know. Be interesting to hear and see where that conversation goes, because other tools like Helm and the likes that are out there to help.
Yeah,
Kubernetes
I think
universe.
it's definitely worth having a conversation up front about it, probably in a different forum, but you're right, like you got Helm out there that, uses Go templating in order to deploy systems. I mean, it would be somewhat trivial to do something similar to that inside of Item or Salt, so that you're deploying stateful things that way, right? Like, you're sort of templating out what objects you're going to send in there, or if you had some way to, take a directory of already created Kubernetes YAML files and jam them into your cluster, like cool, there's a use case for that. And then execution modules to get information in and out, and maybe do like some ad hoc, real cursory things that, but like, I don't know if it's worthwhile to build out a state system over top of every single execution module like you might normally, right? Like, it's kind of redundant at that point. And I don't think that you're going to find anybody that's eager to move to a system like that. So it's really like figuring out what people's workflows are and wrapping it in something that's actually useful.
Yeah,
So-
definitely that execution module side of the things. I could, yeah, like you said, I could see the usefulness of that piece. Or someone was about to say something, I may have interrupted there.
Yeah, no problem. My concern, I mean, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I just joined about 5-10 minutes ago, so I missed some of it. But my concern on this, like when we're talking about, in general, pulling stuff out of Salt and moving it to Item, is what does that actually mean? Are we saying remove the modules from Salt? Are we saying we're going to fork? We're going to have separate?
Necessarily, especially with Kubernetes, where it changes so much so quickly, and Salt releases every 4 months.
Right. So we have a Salt extensions in the works right now, which is meant to solve this problem.
Okay.
So where I was going with what I was saying is, ideally, I think, and I'm open to being wrong about this, but ideally, we could create a Salt extension that has the functionality that we want for Kubernetes, and write it in a way to where it would work for both Item and the existing Salt infrastructure.
That would be
So
awesome.
one quick comment as well. I don't know, like I do not claim to be a Kubernetes expert by any stretch of the imagination. I have dabbled a little bit with it in terms of interacting with Salt, and I imagine there's a lot of people in the community on this call and otherwise, or much more knowledgeable than I am. But that being said, Salt already does have Kubernetes modules, Kubernetes state and execution modules. Where they lack is they just haven't kept up with a lot of the API changes that have gone into Kubernetes. So I tend to agree with DWAS on this one. I don't know if we need to go and like re-implement everything rather than just update what we already have. Maybe in the future, like it could do with a refresh. But again, like I'll go back to my previous statement about going to the community and saying, okay, we want to start a Kubernetes working group with the focus on what Salt and Kubernetes means. What does that mean to you? What do you want to see? What do you want to do with Salt? Because again, like we could guess and be completely wrong. We could be right, but where chances are we'll be wrong. So.
Yeah, I think that having a sort of a fact-finding mission up front would be beneficial, because I suspect that all of those are old and in disrepair because nobody is using them anymore. If anybody was spending any amount of time using them in the field, then I would have thought that there would be like somebody clamoring to update them and get it merged into the code base, but I haven't seen that. And that's kind of why, when Tyler was like, hey, this makes sense inside item because we can iterate faster, I'm on board with it, because it doesn't seem like there's much, use of it in the current code base. But, it could be that I'm completely wrong on that. So getting the word out, like, hey, anybody who's using it, speak now, I think would be worthwhile.
I think this also opens up a broader conversation on the future of item with Salt and the future of extensions with Salt, because it almost seems like we're providing people with two separate pathways to extend Salt's capabilities, where, hey, here's the item plugin approach, and then, hey, here's the Salt extension approach. And I don't know, be interesting to hear what people's thoughts are on the future of that, like where to direct people, what makes the most sense, so someone's making a brand new module for Salt. Okay, should they be following the Salt extensions approach, or should they be making an item plugin and then using Salt with item? Like, I kind of don't really know whether that's fully clear.
That's like Salt's MO for its entire existence, right? Being so very flexible that it can do things any type of way, so much so that people don't know the correct path or the proper path for them to go down.
Yeah, based on that's why we are iterating on the Salt extensions.
Yeah, I believe the correct path is going to be Salt extensions in the long run.
Yeah, there's two open pull requests that I've recently made them pass and fix. One of them just reports any Salt extensions installed when you pass -- versions report, and the other actually updates the way we find extensions through the entry points. Those are not merged yet, but that's like the path forward. So if a new user is trying to create a new module, I guess that would be the path. Given that there's documentation lacking on how to do that, and that's like the next step. And this does not prevent that the same extension can be used in Salt or in item, because the same code or the logic could be used for both. You just have like an interface for Salt to call that in, or item.
Right.
It depends. But
so we're talking about two different things
yeah.
here. We're talking about you have Salt, which is a project which has been around for 8+ years. And then we have item, which is a project that's been around for over a year.
Real quick, the thing that I would use to determine what goes in item and what would be good for an extension item is good for agentless things where you don't need a minion. So that's why item is a good fit for cloud states, because you don't necessarily need a minion for that. If you need a minion, then it's a salt extension. That's for me the distinction. And it
That
should be
makes sense.
to make a module work for both if it's necessary.
But in general, I think we still would want, if we're gonna, rather than forking something, we want to have one way of calling from both, right? And a salt extension, so we have support to run item stuff in salt. So it makes sense that if you're gonna be using item in salt, that you would use a salt extension. So I think, and this is something I was going to push for in our next planning, which is coming up soon, is that for the silicon release, one of our major focuses is to finish fleshing out this salt extensions stuff and get it properly documented and actually pull some modules out into salt extensions. I think Kubernetes stuff would be fine. I think the Bodo modules are a good one because they need not a lot of love, and they're just not getting it right now with our current release cycle and with the core team not being able to have time to work on them. So hopefully pulling them out and then letting someone else, hopefully we can find someone in the community that is eager about it. I think someone has expressed an interest recently. We could give this to them and say, here, go for it. I'm done.
No, those are good thoughts. Thanks, Daniel. I like the "I'm done" at the end. That's the official passing of the talking stick.
Yeah, kind of took things over there.
No, it's great. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, is there any?
Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
No,
yeah,
no, sorry, go ahead, Barney. I was going to make a stupid joke. Your comment is much more important.
I was going to ask, is there any sort of documentation or design available about salt extensions? Because that's actually the first time I'm hearing about salt extensions as a new way of handling extending salt. So is there anything sort of publicly available I can look at?
There are some things. Pedro can point you, I think, in the right direction with that stuff.
Yeah, so we support salt extensions, not by this name, since 2015 or 16, I believe. But we have never made a statement that we could load plugins this way, nor did we add documentation. This new iteration is simplifying even further the way you could create an extension. Basically, it's just a setup tools entry point. But documentation right now is lacking. I could point you to some mock-up salt extensions that I created just to flesh out this process, which just basically points you in the right direction. But this is not the required documentation.
Yeah,
but if you know your way around code, you will figure out what's going on.
It's still, sort of early. Again, this is going to be something hopefully we'll focus on in the next release. We didn't have time to, all we had time to do is basically get our ideas down into a couple pull requests and repos.
Which are not yet merged.
Which are
so,
not yet.
Yeah.
So, but the one thing I will say that is awesome about this approach is that we we have a way to test these as well. So by virtue of making a salt extension using the method that we're going to provide, we'll be able to find all the extensions if they're committed to PyPI. We'll be able to find them and automatically test them against different versions of salt and stuff. Sort of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with how PyTest finds plugins and automatically tests them, but we're going after the same sort of thing.
Cool. So if it's been around since 2015, did you say? Are there any existing publicly sort of visible plugins, or was it for sort of SaltStack Enterprise or something like that?
Originally, it was to support loading the enterprise plugins through entry points and not have to rely on configuration. When we started internally talking about this again, I believe someone pointed out that there are a few projects on PyPy that use the salt entry points. So there are a few, I don't know them by, I don't remind which were those. I would have to look and see what those actually are. So it's a no. There's no known publicly use of these extensions.
Cool. Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, if you do get a chance to point to the sort of example ones you were talking about, where you initially, that would be great.
Yeah, where do you want me to paste them? On which channel?
I either just somewhere in the community Slack would be great.
Develop.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
I will not do that right now. My day is ending, but as soon as I get that information, I will paste it there.
Brilliant.
For
Thank
sure.
you very much.
You're welcome.
And Pedro, when you paste that, if you could just paste it with a note saying, "Hey, we're looking for feedback on this stuff as well."
Yeah.
So we can get some more involvement.
For sure.
Okay, Gareth, you can make your joke now.
I was going to say the appropriate response, final statement when you said you were done was actually to say mic drop. Mic drop.
That's right.
I feel like it lost some of the humor being that delayed out.
Timing matters.
Yeah. Although for the next Salt Community Open Hour, I would find myself a mic, a microphone, and just so that you don't lose the timing with the interruptions of who's going to speak next, just drop it. Some of us will get it, and some don't, and that will make it even funnier.
Here you go.
Oh, there it is.
Not a 57.
That's funny. And then next week, everyone from this week will be on the inside joke with Pedro. So that's great. I really appreciate everybody engaging in this discussion and just really exploring these topics. It's really helpful for us to be able to air this out. We will, certainly reach some conclusions and be very transparent about them, both in Slack and through our open hour. So really appreciate everybody's input. Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I actually had a question that pertains to cloud, but not specifically Kubernetes. One of my daily frustrations is the state of the VMware cloud provider. I've been working on reporting bugs and whatnot. I'm actually contemplating, once I have a PR or two under my belt for a few other things, going to maybe do some work on that. What I don't want to do though is, if because of the acquisition, VMware is now putting resources into that, I obviously don't want to duplicate effort. Do we have any visibility whether there's any active work going on inside VMware to improve the VMware cloud provider, or is that being left to the other products in their suite? And so the open source is going to stay basically as it is until someone in the community improves it.
So we do have some insight into the resources, and it is members of the SALT core team that will be looking into improving the support. So if you have already looked at and identified some issues, we'd be more than interested in taking a look at those, especially if you've already started some PRs. That would be a huge help.
Mostly been Pedro working on it, hasn't it? Lately.
Sorry, what was that, Bryce?
It's mostly been Pedro working on cloud stuff, right? Lately.
I think
not on VMware.
Yeah, I think Pedro's work has mostly been on tests, right?
Yeah, getting tests to run and pass for the clouds. Megan did do some work for the VMware, but was basically just some fixes too. And as Gary is mentioning, there's probably some other bugs there that need to be fixed.
Yeah, I would say, Gary, feel free to go at it as far as VMware modules go. And if we do get resources from VMware, we're happy to have them work with you and help you on your path.
Okay, yeah, I mean, probably, I mean, there's been a few bugs that have been slow, some of them have slowly been getting fixed. And then probably the biggest gap I'm missing is Nsx networking support. So at least, basic support for, distributed switches and, sorry, not distributed switches, virtual networks, beyond the standard VLAN networking into the actual VXLAN networking, that type of stuff. And at some point, I would like to see, NSX Edge support that type of thing. But I'm still early in my process. So I don't want to, I don't want to commit to anything until I'm sure I've developed the sufficient background to do it. And I haven't dug into the Pi vMomi stuff. I know it's a bit of a mess. The NSX stuff is all REST API based as far as I can see. So it's, that may be a little bit easier to tackle. I don't want to step on people's feet if you guys already have kind of a plan laid out for what this should look like, and you already kind of have a plan to tackle it. Although I'm happy to, if that plan's laid out, I'm happy to tackle specific areas. I'm just not sure if I have the skill set to tackle the entire thing in a way that maybe that would take it the direction that VMware would obviously want it to go. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I'm happy to help out where I can.
Oh, I just want to say, it's great to meet everyone. I'm learning some great buzzwords. And on Derek, yeah, I'll try to make the docs meet up, but I might jump in the middle. So yeah, we look forward to that.
Yeah, no worries. It'll be streaming on Twitch, so you just hop in the chat, see me talk to myself.
Okay. I'll be your one follower, right?
Yeah.
Sounds awesome. Derek always needs fans. Not hard to get them. Awesome. Thanks everybody so much for joining us for Open Hour. Always love the opportunity to connect with the community weekly, and look forward to connecting with you all next week. Have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thanks everybody.
All.
Thanks. Bye.